We just witnessed a political revolution in Hungary. Peter Magyar defeated Viktor Orban. But what were the factors determining his success? And can he now actually deliver on his promises? We traveled to Budapest to find out.
Orban was a loud but ultimately unimportant figure. For the US, Hungary might be a nice symbol to use, but frankly, we're a country of less than 10 million people. We should not be dividing the world in our lunchtime. We should be maybe fixing the trains first. One of the first things that people are expecting from Tisztán Magyar is to quote-unquote bring the EU funds home.
I'm personally in favor of this money being used, but only if it's used well.
Frankly, the healthcare system, education system, transportation system, etc., are in shambles, and that includes, of course, corruption. Stopping and unraveling and prosecuting the frankly enormous amounts of corruption that have been going on in the last decades. I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic.
Our guest, Daniel Kalló, is a policy analyst for Publicus Research. He followed the Hungarian elections in detail, analyzing voter preferences and campaign tactics. He watched closely the 2-year campaign of Peter Magyar and is uniquely placed to explain the causes for his success. Before becoming an analyst, Daniel was an activist and ran for the European Parliament in 2019. He witnessed the tactics used by the Orban regime to silence opposition forces and shares these insights today during the episode. Daniel, the Hungarian elections are now just a few weeks old. How is the atmosphere now in the country?
I'd say overall hopeful, and a lot of people, myself included, are still just realizing the depth of this impact and change. I mean, as you know, Orban has been in power for 16 years now. Consecutively, so an entire generation's political memory has been completely formed with the effect that Orban is in power and that government is in power. So to see that gone is still almost surreal for some people. But I think all around the world you could see images of the election night. The mood was something that many compared to the mood during the regime change of '89 that we had here. Of course, that was not exactly true for the supporters of Fidesz, who were, of course, not that hopeful, not that happy. But even with them, there have been, at the time, some very pessimistic people who suggested that there might be riots on the street, etc. So far, there has been nothing of the sort. So overall, I'd say hopeful and maybe cautiously optimistic.
And you yourself have also tried to be an agent of hope. Let's say in the past you were an activist, now you're more of an analyst. How was it at the time to be an activist under the Orban regime?
Not so hopeful. Not so hopeful. But in a way that felt even more empowering. You know, I used to be for 5 years a student activist. We campaigned basically exclusively for education reform. The idea was to gather students from all across the country and do a grassroots, bottom-up, basically student parliament. It was a deliberate democracy sort of thing. And the idea was that, I mean, everyone would like education to be good. Surely there will be no opponents to this. We thought wrong. I think, during my 5 years there, which grew from a handful of students to a movement involved in so many projects and gathering, I think, around 100,000 followers on social media. Maybe at the height, maybe 50. I don't quite remember. Many people. So we've only been able to talk officially with the government, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times, even though we had prepared every year a policy pack. So overall, it was not really an area in which you could feel that the official bodies would listen to you or collaborate with you or frankly respect you. However, even with our specialization in the field of education, which we were very strict about, you could see a lot of support and gratitude coming from the general population, who appreciated people standing up for what they believe in and trying to do something to propagate discourse, debate in the country, which, you know, those were dark days. But it felt that part felt good.
But you describe a general disinterest by the government, but was there also some active undermining of your efforts?
Undermining, maybe overall less so. Definitely, many persons have gotten a lot of bad reactions. I think, now that I think about it, actually, we have gotten a lot of very bad remarks from government officials themselves. I think numerous times we have been called puppets of George Soros and all that. Ironic, because a lot of the members of the Hungarian government themselves have studied in Oxford with a Soros scholarship. My, ex-organization sadly never saw any money from that. So if anyone knows where those transfers stopped, you could let me know, because jokes aside, it was a frustrating time, including personally targeted by people close to the regime, in the media, people, and often with people in other situations and high schools, in the countryside, for example. Very often they did get someone who phoned in from the local municipality saying, why is so and so involved in this clearly opposition thing? Let's make this stop. I mean, I personally have lost a position because of this, because I used to be the EU youth delegate of Hungary, one of them, to a program called the Structured Dialogue. And when I was selected for that, there was a leadership in the National Youth Council at the time who I think were open to the idea of getting in people who thought different things about the world but wanted to work together regarding education. And then after that, they had been changed, and the new presidency was clearly not open to this. And as I later found out, a phone call one day arrived from a certain minister saying, well, obviously we can't have this guy who's speaking, criticizing the government's education policy on the news, talking in the name of the country. So, and that is honestly the stories that have happened, the things that have happened in the past 16 years. This one is basically irrelevant. People have lost livelihoods. Their health has been damaged. They have lost. Frankly, a lot of things, and I do believe that a lot of these stories are still to come out now that there's a bit of air for this.
And today the wind has changed with a clear victory of Magyar, but 4 years ago Orban won by a large majority. So what did change this time?
Yes, that's an important question. That particular victory was a shock for many people. If I can give a little bit of a background, the reason why that election in the beginning caused hope for people was that the opposition tried something which was essentially a system of primaries to combat the various changes in the electoral legislation and electoral rules that Fidesz has made, which basically favors the largest party and the incumbent winning party. They have come with an idea that had been floating in public discourse for years before, to create a united list where in each district there would be one person who had been voted in a primary before, and that way they maximize their chances. Now, multiple things happened. First of all, which was somewhat predictable, this campaign didn't quite work well, because you essentially had left-wing parties, right-wing parties. There were a lot of inside tensions, which were sadly very mismanaged. Sadly, the campaign itself was not ran very well, and thirdly, the war in Ukraine broke out, which is something that a lot of people either underestimate or overestimate in the analysis of that particular election, because it did have a big effect on voter behavior, but it did not on its own decide the fate of that election. Jump forward to this election. Well, what happened was quite unexpected at the beginning, to be honest. We had a political field that, for the opposition, was very, I think, apathetic. There were issues that caused outrage or mobilizations, but regarding how that could be channeled into the parliamentary political system, there weren't many ideas. It was the same parties mostly. Some new ones signed up. And then something which we call the pardon scandal broke out, where it was discovered that a person who has aided the how do you say, brushing under the rug of a pedophile scandal has been given a presidential pardon. And that blew the lid off a lot of bottled anger that has been brewing in people, especially considering that one of the core messages of Orban and the Fidesz government was family first. We protect the children from, ideologies of LGBTQI and all that, as they phrase it. But to then see that this protection of the children doesn't extend to de facto pedophilia caused a lot of very understandable anger in people. And it's a long story. I don't want to rehash every bit of detail, but the president and the justice minister who signed off on the pardon were, I think they officially resigned, but it was very clear that they were pushed out. And Peter Magyar was the ex-husband of the justice minister. And he came out, started saying things, how this is unfair to put this exclusively on these two people, and then started appearing, and he very, very quickly formed a personal brand, which was someone who has come from the other side, someone who raised their voice at a time when he thought it was necessary, and someone who speaks quite well politically. So that was the brand, and that brand had only become stronger since then. The other opposition parties were not really able to compete with this, especially as time went on. I think I might stop there, because otherwise I can tell the whole election story, but we might be here until noon.
Yeah, but beyond the brand, what can we expect from Magyar?
Well, first of all, I think the big promise and the thing that people really essentially voted for was the renormalization of public life. That includes the quality of public services. Frankly, the healthcare system, education system, transportation system, etc., are in shambles. And this is something that is not a new thing, but TISA has managed to once again make these salient questions, things that are politically relevant, rather than just things that we all know about and are apathetic about. So that is the big one, and that includes, of course, corruption and stopping and unraveling and prosecuting the frankly enormous amounts of corruption that have been going on in the last decades. that is, I think, domestically the big things that people are expecting. And also, when I'm saying renormalization, that also includes things like having actual experts, or at least actual politicians in positions of power and decision making, and bringing the quality of public discourse once again to something that is closer to the ideas of democracy, of debate. Because in this last campaign, I think we have genuinely hit, frankly they have, new lows. I mean, one of the infamous way that Orban framed the how Tisza survived the spring, basically, and is still, or used to be still a powerful political party, was saying how the stink bugs have survived the winter, which in Hungarian sounds even more insulting. So using this terminology of vermin, talking openly, saying things like, oh, if Tisza wins, they're gonna take our children to the front. They want war. They're working with Zelensky and the Ukrainians, and then if Tisza wins, your children will die. These are things that basically verbatim said. So to kind of move away from this is something that everyone really expects, and in a European level, just get back to cooperation, basically.
And do you think this will happen concretely, like from the expectation to reality?
I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic. Some of these things are simple on the surface, but actually a bit more tricky to do in real life. One of these is actually unraveling the corruption, because they will need to go after people, and they will have to make decisions. Okay, if there was systemic corruption, which there was, where do they actually stop in prosecuting people? Who do they go after? That will be something that I think Fidesz is very much expecting to capitalize on, and try to phrase it as a sort of witch hunt and political prosecution. So that is definitely going to be a challenge. In other things, I mean, it is even more tricky. For example, reforming public services is going to take an enormous amounts of money. And this has been something that, my very first political memories include, these things should be reformed because they're not efficient. That was, a decade and a half ago. So that is going to be very tricky. Some other things I think they'll have an easier time with. So overall, I think I'm cautiously optimistic, but they have a bumpy road ahead.
And this renormalization that you described before, do you also start feeling it yourself, in the sense that do you feel more free now to speak about what happened with the Orban government that you did before the elections?
I definitely, that is very, a very subjective thing, but I definitely feel, an air of freedom. Just being in public spaces. Of course, that is mostly a psychological thing, because it is not like there was a de facto dictatorship here where you would be shot or sent to prison if you said something. It was more tricky. They would audit your companies, you would get fired, It was in a way even uglier, because it was harder to prove, and you were often ostracized from those circles. Personally, I've for a long time been very vocal regarding my criticisms, but for a lot of people, they had frankly more to risk than I did. So I think this will really trickle down into society, and that actually has started to happen in the last 2 weeks of the campaign. And this was, I think, something that managed to push some percentage of the still undecided / inactive voters into voting, is that we had more and more people coming out from the police, from the military, from secret services, who said, okay, what's happening here is not okay. I've been wanting to say this for a long time. Now I'm coming out to say this. And first it was just one person who gained a lot of public attention with this, then another. So you could really see this momentum of, let's say, a dam breaking.
Yeah, and I think it was the fact of an insider itself, Magyar, like moving away from Orban and denouncing indeed these abuses of power that then led also other spheres like military and police to do the same.
I think that's true, and that's something that overall helped Tisza get where it is now. Something that is very interesting, that if we rewind time, let's say 3 years, and you tell me, okay, there's an insider person who's going to come out and start its own movement, own political party, I'd say, okay, good for him. That's not going to achieve much, because a lot of things depended on the timing that Tisza chose and how they managed to struck a core with people that is sometimes still hard to explain. How this, and it's not like they did not make mistakes. Tisza and Magyar, especially in the early months, did make multiple mistakes. He was often too confrontative with journalists from the opposition who were going to ask him questions. He often was too harsh. He was perceived sometimes aggressive. But something that was nicknamed a non-stick effect had surrounded him like a pan. Things would not stick to him. And that ultimately, he did communicate very well, but that ultimately depends on how people perceive him. And if people think of him as someone who's trying to do a more important thing, then they're not concerned about things that are smaller than that.
And you're an analyst at Publicus Research, so you followed the election quite in detail. In your view, how did Tisza manage to use this electoral system in their favor, even though it was actually designed with the purpose of favoring Orban and Fidesz?
I think it ultimately depends or depended on the amount of support, frankly. If they would have managed to gather less of it, then this would have not worked. This is not a very groundbreaking thought. In the end, now with something that's referred to as the compensation of the winner, with smaller parties who don't get in, their percentages get divided, they have actually gotten more seats than people expected. I think it's 141 officially. So that did favor them, but how they got there was really an uphill battle.
Yeah. And in terms of age groups, in your election analysis, young people voted overwhelmingly against Orban, and also with a pro-European stance. Can you tell us a bit the number?
I actually don't have those numbers by heart, but absolutely it was an overwhelming support from the younger people in the younger population. And of course, since the last election and the last few elections, the aging population had overall favored Orban. Of course, their numbers have decreased in the past decade, but it is actually more complicated than that, and more interesting than that, because if you compare the turnouts and people's voting preferences with previous elections, and particularly the European parliamentary election in 2024, you can see that Tisza, which had at the time already won a surprising amount of supporters, not only kept those voters, but brought in voters from both the Fidesz camp and the Mi Hazánk camp, the far-right party Mi Hazánk, but also a lot of them from the people who were undecided or apolitical. A good chunk of these people voted for Fidesz in 2022. They were very well mobilized by the anti-war campaign, or frankly the warmongering threats that Fidesz used. As they tried now, they also, but with more success, use the panels that the opposition wants war, and if you want peace, if you want to live, if you want your children to live, you should vote for Fidesz because that's safe. That didn't work this time. And I think that is ultimately which shows the failure of this regime, that it wasn't merely young people who have, frankly done their part in changing this government. It wasn't just a generational thing of Fidesz being out of touch with the new generation, which is also, frankly, very true. It was them getting too comfortable with their rhetoric, of too brazen with the level of corruption and the disregard for any last remnants of a democratic and civic system. Just way too comfortable, way too brazen. And with the economy being where it is, and the answer to that is not good, and has not been good for a long while now, despite big promises from government officials promising a flying start in, I think, 2024, people have just became disgruntled.
Was there any tipping points during the election campaign where you would have said, okay, Magyar is going to win it? Or was it really until the end nobody knew what would happen?
That's a very good question. I think there were many tipping points. For me personally, I was at first a bit skeptical, partially due to my personal political memories of thinking that, let's say, that 2022 election is closer than it ever was, and then that turning out to be the record-breaking victory of Fidesz. But now where was I? So some polling institutes like Median very quickly and very early said that projected big victories for Tisza. With Publicus, our numbers were a bit more cautious. We paid particular attention to the undecided voters, the people who were not sure about their voting preferences, and up until the last, I'd say, 2 weeks, I still wasn't sure how most of these people would be voting. I was, in the last month, sure that Tisza would win. But for me personally, the tipping point was reviewing, I think, our last numbers that came out a week before the election, or maybe a few days, where we compared that to our latest survey 2 weeks before. And in both of those surveys, we tried to gauge the opinions of this particular undecided group of people. And that included questions like, who would you bet rather than support? Who would you bet would win? And how are your surroundings? How do you think your surroundings or who are they expecting to win? And one more thing, sorry. In the survey 2 weeks before the election, something came out that was new for us. We had been asking for, I think, a year, who would you prefer Fidesz to win, or would you prefer a new government? And who do you think is going to win, Fidesz or a new government? And in all of the past year, the attitudes have been the majority saying they would prefer Fidesz to lose, but the majority also always said they are expecting Fidesz to win. And that changed in the last month. And 2 weeks after that, all of these attitudes that I've mentioned, all of these questions, the amount of people who were favoring Tisza in their judgment has increased with multiple percentage points just in 2 weeks. And I think at that point, I felt that, okay, this is going to be big.
And we watch the election from all over the EU, but also the European Union watch Hungary democratic state deteriorating through 16 years. So how is possible that this happened? And in your opinion, did the European Union take enough action in order to discourage this?
I think short answer is no. I think we can all remember how cozy EPP, which I think by a lot of accounts is the measure of the European mainstream, how cozy they were with Fidesz amidst their rows, as long as they brought their numbers for the party's parliamentary share. I think we can also cast fair criticism regarding Angela Merkel in that regard, how various business interests and political interests caused her to, let's say, brush over elements of Orban's politics, which were perfectly clear already in 2015. The first alarm bells of this consecutive term had been, the first serious ones were already visible in 2011. So when someone says, well, we couldn't have really quite seen where this was going, that's a complete falsehood. It was perfectly obvious. Of course, on another note, it is not an easy situation to deal with. I think that has been very obvious in the past years with trying methods like the conditionality mechanism, etc., etc. So it's not an easy thing to deal with. But my short answer, no. And my long answer was this.
Yeah, because the question is also, does the European Union have the tools in order to avoid this democratic backlash within their member state?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to stop it, no. To, let's say, not quite punish it, but to really clearly disincentivize it, yes. And I think that a lot of these tools are either already existing or are being talked about, and the bottom line is whether there's political will. I mean, Article 7 is the scary monster that lives in a closet that no one has seen before. Basically, it's such a nuclear option that no, it's not really used at all. I'm not saying that it should be, but I'm saying if the political will is lacking, then it's ultimately not about the tools. It's about the attitudes.
Article 7, maybe just for the audience, being to block the right of a member state to vote in council.
Yeah.
So this nuclear option was never used, probably for diplomatic or cautiousness reasons, but the conditionality regulation was used, basically making the funds conditional on certain reforms. But in the end, we saw that these reforms did not really materialize. That's also why still some funds are blocked. Did this pressure just not work?
That's a very good question. I actually forgot to mention that one of the first things that people are expecting from Peter Magyar is to quote-unquote bring the EU funds home. Because that was something very well documented in Hungarian media and very well publicized everywhere that certain EU support money is being withheld. Now, people's opinions were very divided on it, and it was not, as some people maybe a bit naively expected, overall a positive one, or the anger wasn't necessarily directed at Fidesz from everybody. I think majority of people, yes, but a good chunk has perceived this as Brussels taking our money, and that was also used by Orban as well. So I think there is actually a bigger debate to be had here about how these tools are used, especially in an area or an era where a lot of citizens don't have that much of a connection to the European Union, or even a perception of it is very limited. I think that overall, I personally sit at the side of the fans that said that these funds had to be suspended. Specifically, if I'm thinking of the perspectives of other European countries who are, giving a good share of their GDP and income to be used for the purposes that they should be used for, and then instead they're buying fancy cars for Orban's friends. So, yes, but it's tricky.
And clearly, the Hungarian elections was quite closely watched by Europeans all across the continent. Did you feel this, that there was this particular attention?
Oh yes, very, very much so. to give a personal answer to this question, during the night of the election, I actually had to put my phone on mute because it was constantly buzzing from messages, not just from friends but acquaintances from all around the world saying, oh, they're watching live in the US, in Central Asia, and here and there, and how amazing this is. So that amount of attention has been frankly very touching. From another perspective, that really shows the extent of the problem that Orban had been causing, which I think also contributed to his downfall. He really liked playing world politics. He when TISA was an upcoming party and they organized meetings in many rural small towns and villages, Orban was in the US having discussions with Trump, and then in Moscow discussions with Putin, and he was really talking about his visions for world politics, while the trains wouldn't work in Hungary, and if you go to a hospital you have to wait X amount of time. So that really did hurt him, and I personally would love to just go back to being a country that people don't really know that much about, especially about our leadership. You can know about our wonderful culture, but just go back to, as when I introduce myself somewhere as Hungarian, they don't automatically know that, oh, Viktor Orban, so how's that going?
Yeah. And there I think that there were some people cheering for Orban's defeat, but we also had seen a lot of support, for example, from other forces like Putin's Russia, J.D. Vance in the US just coming to Budapest a few days before the elections. Orban defeat, what also does it mean for this network that share a similar ideology of sovereignism across the world?
Now that's going to be very interesting to see. I think on the one hand, Orban has for a long time been a bit of a symbol for among this group as someone who is perceived to do right by his country, and no matter what the people in Brussels say. So to see him lose and get the case study that this doesn't actually sustain itself until infinity will definitely, I think, curb some of the enthusiasm within this camp. On the other hand, as I alluded to in my previous answer, Orban was a loud but ultimately unimportant figure.
It was a symbol.
He was a symbol, yes. But especially when viewed in the comparison of Trump and Putin, who he loved to platform himself with, both of these countries have, I think with Russia it was a bit more tricky, but have ultimately, after the election, recognized Peter Magyar as the new leader without too much of a fuss. There was some Trumpism about him being a great guy or something like that. So I don't quite know. But the perception that Orban tried to propagate that these are his allies ultimately failed. If I can throw in a quick anecdote about this, one particularly bad in the list of blunders of this Fidesz campaign, in which there have been many, this was a very badly run campaign, was a moment a few months ago, actually it was longer than that, but in the context of the EU funds being withheld, Orban and Fidesz had been talking a bit about, maybe they can get a financial, let's say, shielding package from somewhere else. And then they went to the US with a jet that was full of Fidesz sympathizing influencers and their propagandists, basically. And they had the meeting with Trump. And after the meeting, almost in a Chamberlain fashion, Orban got off the plane and said, "We got the financial shield. President Trump has promised us that if Brussels holds back the funds, the US has got our backs." And not too long after that turned out to be completely false. Someone asked President Trump in an interview, oh, by the way, what's up with that Hungarian shield? And said, oh, yes, they asked for that, but I didn't get it. So that was just, catastrophically embarrassing, and really underlined that for the US, Hungary might be a nice symbol to use, but frankly, we're a country of less than 10 million people. We should not be dividing the world in our lunchtime. We should be maybe fixing the trains first.
A very interesting anecdote, yet it also shows that Hungary is considered by the US of such geopolitical importance that they're willing 1 week before the elections to send the vice president to openly support the current government. But apart from the geopolitical significance or non-significance, how was this visit perceived by Hungarian people?
It did not get too much attention, to be honest. I think sending J.D. Vance had more to do with the symbolism of Orban, and I've heard things about how, of course, they did not want to get J.D. Vance. They wanted Donald Trump here. They couldn't get Donald Trump here. They got J.D. Vance. Now everyone can judge to what extent they think that to be a political substitution. I certainly have my opinions. And I think that with the Hungarian population generally shared my sentiment. It was before thought to be something that could affect the campaign. Ultimately, both in the numbers and in just the following week, no one was really talking about it. It was something that frankly dwarfed by the actual stakes of this election, the actual problems that people are facing.
Yeah, and I definitely myself think it was a political substitution to just put J.D. Vance's face in an election that was uncertain instead of putting his public endorsement. But one big connection of Orban, like at least symbolic, and what you could see in the media was Orban's relation with Putin, also with the recent leaks in the EU Council about sanctions, where the Hungarian foreign minister leaked sensitive information to Lavrov directly. What is the main point linking Orban's Hungary with Putin's Russia? What if the main interest?
Short answer is energy. Gas, oil. What you have to understand about the Hungarian energy system is that it is a tremendously outdated one. And this, of course, after 16 years of being consecutively in power is very obviously the responsibility of Fidesz, how they have not modernized it. So a lot of the oil refineries and the oil capacities are still using technology which was predominantly built to cater to Soviet standards of oil and such. The pipelines that could substitute this to actually have a diversified energy infrastructure are just not there. It is overall definitely reliant on Russia. There's a lot of reasons to economically how this worked. One of the core policies of Fidesz was something called rezsicsökkentés in Hungarian. It was basically the reduction of like heating and overhead costs, and they set like fixed rates, which also the incentivized energy companies themselves to modernize their equipment, yada yada yada. Interesting stuff. But besides energy, I do believe that there are links here politically between the regimes that are not yet, let's say, well documented. And I'm going to say not yet obvious, because I think we can definitely see signs that there is cooperation going on in there, which, for example, has also been going on between the Kaczynski government in Poland and Orban. That wasn't just rhetorical support. There has been exchanging of experts and campaign advice and all that. So it is not beyond my personal imaginations to think that there have been such streams with Russia, especially in the face of the leaked phone calls where Péter Szijjártó is leaking information towards the Russian government and is frankly acting as an errand boy for them, getting people off the sanctioned list. If I can be a bit honest for a second, to see this in the context of their governmental rhetoric being built around sovereignty, while without any reservations doing the bidding of another country, is anything between ridiculous and blood boiling.
How do you see that the foreign policy will now change with the new government, both in relation to Russia, but also in relation to the EU?
That is a very interesting question, and the jury is a bit still out on that one. What we can definitely predict is that Tisza and Peter Magyar will be getting back to at least a traditional sense of disagreement with EU institutions. He has signaled many areas of policy in which he has disagreements with the Brussels, in which he would like an exception or an alteration or such, but he had both explicitly said so, and I also believe that he will try to solve these within the traditional channels of political disagreement. So I think regarding the EU and regarding international politics, Hungary will probably get back to just frankly respecting the rules and the norms, because contrary to what Orban tried to frame the issue as, the problem was never disagreeing. The problem was splitting the table and crossing norms that everyone, when their country had entered this union, agreed not to cross, and abusing institutions such as the ability to veto. One of my core memories in this regard is when at the still crucial part of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, he had vetoed the recovery fund, which was, the policy, the response that not just Brussels but a lot of Europe was also waiting for. And to veto that, I think, showed to me and also to a lot of European decision makers that there are no things off limits for the Orban government here, and that is something that is very dangerous.
Yeah, and considering funds, and to talk 1 second about economics also at a very broad level, what do you think was the impact of the European Union funds in Hungary's recent developments in the last 16 years? Was it substantial or was it more marginal?
I think it was frankly substantial, but not to the extent that if this money was actually used how it was supposed to be used, could have been. I think overall, for the Eastern Partnership countries, for these Eastern member states to participate well in the European economy, frankly, these types of supports are needed. Moreover, they also improve the overall recognition and image of the European Union. So I'm personally in favor of this money being used, but only if it's used well, because there have been so many instances, and not just in Hungary, by the way, of EU money being blatantly misused. The infamously rural mayor, I think, built how was it called? A walkway, an elevated walkway for seeing the tree line, but in a field where there were no trees. And that's just one of the stories. So ultimately not as well as
in Italy.
I do think that there's similarities.
And Magyar received a 2/3 majority. You said it before in the beginning. It seemed like 138 seats. Now you even mentioned 141 as the final count, which in theory gives him the power to make a whole lot of reforms, but on the premise that this Tisza party remains as united as it was during the campaign. Do you think that will happen, or is it likely there are some cracks, some power struggles inside at some point?
That is something that is also a good question. I think overall, it is very unlikely that any power struggle will happen to the extent that will actually cause a sedition from the party, splitting of the party. I think that is, at the moment, unthinkable. Now, will there be potential power struggles in the party? I think now that is something that maybe a bit more likely. Still, I'd say overall unlikely, but there are many characters in there who are not just popular among the people, but very ambitious people who have worked for a long time as leaders in their field. But overall, I think that the amount of control that the TISA members have exercised on themselves and how they've been very strict in following the party line, to the extent that it was often not sympathetical to some members of the public. I mean, it was very hard to talk to anyone in TISA besides Peter Magyar until the last months of the campaign, when more and more key people were introduced, which was understandable when we see it in the context of the previous elections, but still something that people had to get used to. So overall, I think it's unlikely that such a rift will happen, but there will definitely be power dynamics in the new parliament that are different to how they were when they were just an opposition party.
And I think that these things are also difficult to predict on the spot.
Absolutely, and we might just see a black swan. We don't know.
Exactly.
You said before that there are some aspects where Magyar will be against some EU policies. What areas are those?
I think that the most vocal one is migration. He has said that they will be even stricter on migration than the Orban government, albeit while finding a way to participate in the European solution. It is at the moment a bit hard to judge his actual stances, and we still have a bit of the fog of the campaign, as to say. But I think that is definitely one. Yeah, that's the one I'd highlight right now. The other ones, there have been statements, and there have been the statements that are a bit contradictory to them. We frankly don't yet know. Migration is one to watch. On Ukraine, I think he will be definitely more cooperative than the Orban government, but also maybe more reserved than some of the active participants. I think he, with, for example, these new loans, he stated that he won't object to them as long as Hungary doesn't have to participate in them. So there definitely will be some political games that will play there.
Yeah. So because migration in Ukraine are the most polarizing topic, or among the most, so it will make concession, I think.
Absolutely, and this has already been visible when he was an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, in the People's Party, with European People's Party, where he had taken minority opinions within the party and voted against party lines before. So that was, of course, also under the magnifying glass of the then completely Fidesz-controlled Hungarian state media, which, by the way, is also one of the first things that people are expecting to change. And he has obviously said to defund or even break apart these institutions of the state-run media that has reached almost North Korean levels of propaganda. So just in a side note.
Well, thanks a lot, Daniel, for this amazing episode.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, and enjoy beautiful sunny Budapest today.
Thank you.